Hello everyone, this is Phillippe from the Alford group here. This is just a 1-minute warning. If you are joining us as a participant, your line should be muted, so don't worry about that, and we will start promptly in about a minute. Thank you. Hello everyone, and a very happy new year. We are so pleased that you've joined us for the beginning of 2020. I am Phillippe with the Alford Group, a Senior Client Service Associate. I'm just going to start with a couple of logistics today. I know many of you are familiar with our firm, but for those who aren't, the Alford Group is a national full-service consulting firm specializing in the nonprofit and social sectors, and we are privileged to work with many community foundations and to be collaborating today with AdNet, an organization that's dedicated to connecting community foundation professionals across the country. We really admire AdNet's work in strengthening foundations and the communities that they serve. The Alford Group collaborates on projects from fundraising and strategic planning to corporate partnership strategy, data analytics, and much more. Our goal is to provide guidance, tools, and structures that empower organizations to have the greatest possible impact. And if you'd like to know more, we have many insights and tons of information at our website, alford.com. Today, we're joining forces with AdNet to present a webinar called The Future of Philanthropy and Why Diversity Matters for Community Foundations. A fantastic issue. I'm very excited about our conversation. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, this webinar has been approved for 1 CFRE credit, which is worth noting. Secondly, our webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you after the event along with the slides. You'll receive a follow-up email after today's webinar with the slides, the recording, as well as a short survey asking for your feedback, and we'd be very appreciative. We take everyone's feedback very seriously and are grateful for that. So everyone who's joining us today is in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. We will be having a Q&A session at the end, but we will not be opening any lines just to avoid any feedback. So if you have a question at any point, you can enter that in at the bottom of your Zoom window. There's one button, there should be 3 buttons, chat, Q&A, and raise hand. If you could please use the Q&A button, we will be monitoring that, the question and answer part of Zoom, and we'll be able to take your questions and ask it to the panelists at the end for our last 10 minutes. Lastly, we invite you to join us on Twitter using the hashtag NPOStrengths. That's the hashtag NPOSTRENGTH. We'll be live tweeting and invite you to join the conversation there as well. Now with the logistics taken care of, I'll pass the microphone to my wonderful colleague, Jamie Phillippe, CFRE and Vice President with the Alford Group, former Vice President of Philanthropy for the Chicago Community Trust, to introduce today's presenters.
Thank you, Leva. As a former community foundation professional, I'm excited to welcome my colleagues from AdNet and beyond to participate in today's conversation. We'll cover the intersection of diversity and giving through donor-advised funds, asking the question, what can your community foundation do to be more proactive, strategic, and intentional relative to growing engagement and support from diverse donors? We have 4 panelists joining us today. From New York State, Alok Pinto, member of the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo Centennial Commission, and president of the Pinto Family Foundation. Welcome, Alok. We also have Beverly Grant, chair of Giving Black Giving Circle at the Greater Cincinnati Community Foundation. She is also board chair of National Underground Railroad Freedom Center and is a retired executive from Procter & Gamble. Hello, Beverly. Our third panelist is Hipólito Paul Rodin, president and CEO of Hispanic Housing Development Corporation in Chicago, a board member of Latino Policy Forum, the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture, and board chair of the Cook County Housing Authority. Plus, he is a DAF holder at the Chicago Community Trust. Good afternoon, Paul. And our fourth panelist is Gloria M. Harrison, former president of Crafton Hills College and past president for Inland Empire Community Foundation in Riverside. She's currently active on the foundation's Youth Grantmakers program and the Women's Giving Circle. She served as a governor's appointee to the California Commission on the Status of Women. Welcome, Gloria.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today and bringing your insightful perspectives on the issues of diversity facing community foundations. Moderating today's panel is the president and CEO of the Alford Group, Brenda Asari. Brenda, I'll hand it over to you to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And once again, thank you all for being on the call this afternoon. The world of philanthropy and who is considered a philanthropist continue to evolve for organizations who seek to do more good. We all have seen the headlines about people of color being defined as being new to philanthropy, which is a myth and minimizes their contribution to advancing large-scale change in our country. With the Census Bureau's estimation that people of color will make up half of the population by 2050, transforming the field of philanthropy and accelerating the spread of new methods of giving among donors of color present a real opportunity for community foundations. Together, donors of color and community foundations have the potential to become agents of change. To set the context for our time together today, we will focus on race and ethnicity, in part because this is where most organizations are missing the greatest opportunity. I must share that there is a dearth, let me say, no information on the integration of integration in the intersection between donors and donor-advised funds. I remain grateful to our panelists who will share their insights relative to how donors of color approach donor-advised funds. Without question, the explosive growth of donor-advised funds have called attention to how this vehicle enables donors to stay close to their giving and make meaningful impact without having to do all the work. When we take a look at charitable giving in 2018, individuals contributed an estimated $37.1 billion, an equivalent of nearly 13% of individual giving to donor-advised funds, a continued increase over 2017 when the equivalent was 10.5% of individual giving. Donor-advised funds continued on their growth trajectory in every key metric. Grants from donor-advised funds and contributions to them grew in tandem. Grants at 19% and contributions just above 20%, reaching new heights. Assets climbed to an all-time high of 8.3%, with the number of fund accounts jumping significantly over 728,000. We did see a 30% decrease in average donor-advised fund size due to the emergence of workplace giving donor-advised fund accounts and sponsoring organizations having no or low contribution minimum. When we take a look at the average size of donor-advised funds, we see that the average donor-advised fund asset size at community foundations is higher than the other two types of charitable sponsors, with the average being just over $166,000 compared to $438,000 at community foundations. Taking a look at diverse donors by the numbers, donors of color are real and complex individuals with unique personal stories who bring generous engagement with their families, their communities, and their culture. Donors of color are generous and philanthropically engaged, but remain absent as members of organized donor networks, invisible to mainstream philanthropy, and largely not visible or known to each other. However, they do exist in significant numbers, are engaged in giving at high levels on issues affecting their communities, and in many cases, a broad range of issues. Research by the Lilly School further highlighted the fact that households across all racial groups give at significant levels, especially when income and education are taken into account. We see that while religion and basic needs top giving priorities, donors of color are not monolithic in their giving, and assumptions should be set aside when approaching them to support issues beyond religion and basic needs. When we go inside the minds of donor-advised fund holders in general, we see a range of characteristics in giving strategies. From the anonymous to the philanthropist next door, it is a reminder that one approach does not fit all. I'd like to now turn to our panel. Thank you again for joining us on this webinar to further break ground and share your insights on this important topic. I would like to start with the question of, what shaped your philanthropic view of the world, and how were you first introduced to donor-advised funds? Beverly, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you, and I'm so excited to be able to participate today. I would say my beginning in philanthropy and giving was with my mother. We grew up very, very poor, but my mom always had our house and our home open to sharing with others. And so I think that's what really painted the view for me of giving. I was introduced to donor-advised funds by my CPA as I was transitioning in my job, in my career. And so what he recommended is that establishing a donor-advised fund would help me from a financial standpoint, also give me a tax advantage by setting up a donor-advised fund. So that was my first introduction to considering a fund for myself.
Thank you. Gloria?
I come from a community that helps each other. And while there were, if somebody had a tragedy, if somebody needed an extra hand, our neighborhood, our barrio, we found a way to help each other. And so that's been instilled in us. As far as a donor-advised fund, that came from just serving on the community foundation and learning what they were, what the different funds were. And also it was a way for us to focus our giving. My husband and I sat down, we said, what are the most important to us? And where do we want to give our, whatever we have to give, where do we want to do it? Besides doing volunteer work, where do we want to put what few monies we have, and where will it do the most good? And so, and without having to do an awful lot of work on our own, and that's why I really appreciate the donor advice fund in that aspect.
Terrific. Alok?
Yes, so thanks for having me. I would say that our strong ties to our immigrant background, having come to this country in the mid-'80s, really established in us a desire to give back to the country that welcomed us with open arms. As for how we got introduced to donor advised funds, my father was an investment banker, so he was very familiar with all sorts of methods for charitable giving, and this was a top priority for him. But he also, when he established this, wanted it to be a family enterprise. So all the members of our immediate family are involved. And when he passed on in 2014, I took over for him, running the fund.
Fantastic, thank you. Hippolito?
Well, thank you. So my view is, and my experience is very much similar to Beverly's. You know, I grew up in Brooklyn. You can probably still hear that, in a working class family. Both my mom and dad worked. I worked as a student every Christmas, summer, you know, Easter that I can get and go out. My sister did the same. And our family philosophy was that whatever we had belonged to no one, it belonged to everyone. So we had this concept that the, you know, family both as an individual social unit, you know, as a spiritual unit, as a economic unit, didn't stop at our apartment door. It went out to the community. So that was one very important issue. The other one was, you know, that I survived 13 months in Vietnam in the infantry. I was running around the jungles with an M60 machine gun, sort of like Rambo, except I was terrified, and was able to survive that, and many sort of very courageous comrades of mine did not. So I came home trying to make some sense of that. And then the last thing was, you know, that, you know, I somehow became a MacArthur Fellow. You know, the MacArthur Fellowship happens because there are 30 anonymous nominators around the country who send 2 names into the foundation, and then the foundation picks your name. You don't apply for this, you don't dance in front of anyone, it just comes out of the sky. And when that happened, my wife and I, you know, were trying to figure out how we got, you know, more Latinos and Latinas into the community development field, which was virtually devoid of Black and brown people at the time. And, you know, just creating a scholarship was one way to do that. So the grant I got, no strings attached, no reports, was $275,000. The government taxed about a third of that. So we took about $100,000 of that and put it into this fund that was run by Hispanic Housing, the nonprofit I was working for. And in time, then it became, for many, many reasons, which I'll spare you of, more efficient to put it into a donor-advised fund. And I got a lot of good information from the Chicago Community Trust about how that could be done.
Terrific. Gloria, as a part of our earlier conversation, you alluded to philanthropy as a family business. And I just heard Alok also refer to the family business. Could you expand on that sentiment?
Well, I think, let me start out by saying that joining a community foundation as a director was a tremendous educational opportunity for me. Our giving was whatever issue was going on in our community, and whatever emergency was going on in our community. And several times we knew that that it was a temporary thing. And so by pulling into a donor advised fund, it made us think of our giving as a family, not just as individuals, as a family. And so we sat down with the family and said, where do we want to put our contributions, and how do we want to handle this? And of course, then comes the whole thing. It's, do we want to form a family foundation? We decided no, we did not want to do that because all of us were involved in our own careers. So the Community Foundation Donor Advised Fund was the best way for us to go. Now we do have an endowment that we set aside, And that one, we contribute whatever the interest is on a yearly basis, but we have a couple of other funds. One is a scholarship fund, and the other one is just for grant for tax purposes. We put in what we think we give for the year into a fund, and then we distribute it. That one we distribute throughout the year, and the work is done by the Community Foundation. But we look at it as another aspect of our family business. We are small business. We are a small business in addition to being having a career in education. We also publish weekly newspapers, and that is the family business. And so we look at it as another aspect of the family business to be able to give. Now, if it hadn't been for the Community Foundation being on the board, and I want to make this very clear, I think that one of the things that's absolutely essential is that every board, every community foundation look at its diversity, not only geographically, what area they serve, but also ethnically, also as far as having, an attorney, somebody who comes from a nonprofit, somebody who comes from business world, so that you have those aspects. And once that board of directors, and you have to put emphasis on developing those people, they become your best ambassadors, I think, about the worth of a community foundation.
Well, speaking of ambassadors, Beverly, I know some of the work that you have been involved in leading in Cincinnati is the Giving Black Giving Circle. Can you give us a little background on how the genesis of that and where you're taking that organization and what you hope to accomplish?
Thank you. So Giving Black Cincinnati is an outburst of Giving Black Boston. Bethia Carter started the Giving Black opportunity in Boston. And one of the things that she learned, and I would say that I experienced, is that when you went to fundraising gatherings, that 70% of the recipients were people of color. 95 to 98% of the people there as donors were not. And so that's when she decided to do some investigation, do a little bit of research around why is that. And the misnomer is that Black people or people of color don't give because they don't have it to give. That is not true. What she found, and what we found here in the city of Cincinnati as well, is people don't give because they're not asked. They're not invited into the giving situation. So the opportunity with Giving Black is for those of us, and it is Black, so it's not a person of color, it is Black. What we're thinking about and what we're leading towards is getting people who have the opportunity to give, invested in giving things to, African American or Black children. We're right now focusing on 3 groups. So children, so youth, and then emancipated youth, and then single moms. Because we know if we can impact the lives of young people, we can change the trajectory of their future. And so that's really what the genesis is. And so we're getting people who we've seen at all of these various events, because in Cincinnati, it's not much different. It's probably, 85-15 or 90-10. And so we're connecting those people who know other people, and we're creating this circle. So this will be our first year to give. And we're really excited about what we know it will do to change the community for those who are willing to give and excited about giving, as well as those that are in need.
So, Beverly, what are you using as the value proposition, and what is the level of investment that a member needs to that they would need to invest in order to come into the circle?
Yeah, so this first year, because we're very targeted and very focused, in order to join the circle, the giving level starts at $2,500. We've already done what I would consider pre-recruiting, because we want to ensure that as we establish the circle and establish the fund, that we've worked out the kinks, if you will, before we go very, very public. So we've already done the first round of funding to get us at our initial goal, and we're going to have a reception actually on January 22nd. That's going to be our public launch of the circle, where we've invited people in who participated in the research It's open to the public so they can understand a little bit more about the Giving Circle. We've circulated the research and the outcomes of that. And so we're really excited. But the initial giving into the circle for 2020 is the $2,500 range.
Okay, thank you.
Plus.
Okay, thank you. Alok, as a second generation fund holder, how is your approach similar and or different from your father's?
Well, my father's goals in terms of philanthropic giving were very narrow. He came to this country with literally nothing, from a background in India, which I think most Americans would consider abject poverty. A 3-room flat, no car, no television, nothing like that. One bed that the whole family slept in, that sort of thing. Dogs that were there to kill snakes as opposed to being pets. And he came here with literally nothing. But because he came from a country that believed in education, he was able to go to university in India for essentially free and came out debt-free. And so when he came to the States and had he had admittance to grad school. And so as he climbed up in his career and really lived this American dream, he was very focused on reflecting on how he was able to do that. And he realized it was a matter of circumstance and in large part luck. And he recognized that he was able to succeed because he had access to education. So access to education was a very big deal for him, a singular issue, if you will. And he instilled those values in my sister and myself. And when I took over the fund, I was more, I'm still interested in looking at access to education as a major cause that we fund and support. But I was also interested in looking into these underlying causes in communities where lack of access to education was prevalent. So, focus on education often focuses on high school and college level. We wanted to make sure that we were looking at job training and employment causes, and also community uplift, because if there is no stable home life, it can be very difficult to make the most of your education. So I'd say the difference between my father and I is he was very narrowly focused, and I've tried to broaden that in terms of what we're addressing. And I've also branched out in terms of other causes as well. We're very involved in the refugee and asylum seeker community here in Buffalo. Basically, populations that are at risk in highly unstable situations. These are all important to the surviving members of my family.
Thank you. Paul, as you were making your decision on how to make the best use of your Genius Award, what influenced your decision to open a donor-advised fund versus any of the other giving vehicles? You could have easily opened a family foundation.
Could have. I was trying to go down the road of least resistance. So I was the first employee of Hispanic Housing as a nonprofit. Came from Brooklyn to head up, the place and all of that. And when I sort of received that award, I sort of the idea that not many Latinos who were in the community development field and really didn't understand what it was either. I think part of the challenge to some extent in America in terms of traditional careers is, if your dad is a doctor or if your mom is a poet, and, so that you have a direction from family, friends, people that you're associated with. And many Black and brown children don't have that opportunity. And so, part of the challenge was when we said, hey, look, let's help young people, get careers in this field, was going out to high schools and to colleges and to get them to understand what it was, taking them out on buses, showing them specific projects, people living in quality, affordable housing, all of that. So, so establishing the scholarship fund within our nonprofit organization, it started out with that, but as it got larger, we've raised $300,000 or $400,000 for the fund since then. The opportunity to associate it with an institution that did this work, that invested the funds in a better way, that provided reports. What we did was that we established a scholarship fund that would fund graduate level students at Roosevelt University, their real estate school. And, we've so far have gotten 24 graduate students through the program. A number of them are out there as development people in California, Miami, a number of them here in Illinois, all over the country, actually. So it's continued to sort of slowly grow and produce what we had hoped would happen. But the Donor Advised Fund was a vehicle to sort of streamline, organize, give me some control. I spent a little bit of time producing a memorandum of understanding with the foundation to try to be as sure as possible that the money would go to where I wanted to go. And I meet with every single prospective student and have breakfast or lunch with them, interview them, realize very quickly they're much smarter than me, and could do many, many things in their future careers. So it's sort of a hands-on process, but in the end, taking care of the fund, transferring checks to the university for specific students, and the university providing reports to me on their progress and all of that is an efficient and effective way of setting this up right now.
Okay. As we think about engaging donors of color, what do you think these diverse donors are listening for relative to why a donor advised fund? There's a lot of competition for mind share and wallet share, but what are you saying to your, Gloria, what are you saying in the marketplace when you talk about donor advised funds to your colleagues, to your network?
I promote the efficiency of it. I promote the fact that that we see in our communities an awful lot of nonprofits that are based on somebody's passion for the moment, and they don't last. And so my spiel to them is, you want to make a lasting impression in our community, whatever it is. Whether it's education, whether it's the environment, whether it's healthy eating or it's arts, whatever it is that passion is of that person, or it may be a group, or it may be a family. And then I don't think most people think about everything that's involved in giving. And so I think most people just want to give. I want my contribution to make a difference in my community. And so, but they don't think about all of the paperwork and all of the other stuff that goes along with it. And so I suggest to them, especially if they're thinking of forming a nonprofit, that they create a fund first and then focus on that. And then if they want to go in the future and do their own nonprofit as a family or as a business nonprofit, then they can go and do that. But I have found that most people don't realize the amount of work that it takes to create your own nonprofit and to develop a board of directors and all of that kind of stuff. And so this one really focuses on what their passion is and how they can efficiently get it out to their community. And that's what my selling point is to them. And I have been successful in creating that. And most of the people have given up the idea of having their own private nonprofit, because this allows them to focus their passion, whatever resources they have, in a very efficient way.
Gloria, thank you. Well, Beverly, any thoughts from you relative to how do we make donor advised funds more accessible, more attractive to people of color?
I think it's all about communication. One of the things that I hope to do with the committee, and I say the committee and I hope to do, is that when we have our reception next Wednesday, we want to introduce that as a concept. One of the things that we found when we did the research is that people think that they need a lot of money, and a lot is relevant to people, right, on how to become a philanthropist. And so I think education and awareness is the most critical opportunity for us to let people know, one, make them aware, and then two, how to get involved and what the benefit is, both to them and to the community to whom they're trying to serve.
Terrific. So
the other thing I would like to also, Brenda, the other thing I'd like to also mention too is that the partnership that I have with my donor advised fund with the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, in addition to the philanthropic work that I try to do in the community, go hand in hand. That's the other thing that I really like about it. The ability to partner with them on opportunities that I would naturally give to, but also just to be aware, like, so they're doing this Giving Black Giving Circle. It's just terrific. I mean, for them to be that self-aware, if you will, and that invested in trying to bring this to life is really important to me as a person that has a fund here, but also very important to the community. So they are a terrific partner.
You know, we have on the line 60 representation, 67 community foundations from across the country. And I think a question that I would be interested in hearing your perspective on, panelists, is, you know, we've heard about your focus on education and issues impacting, you know, your community. And I'd like to just get your perspective on, you know, this concept of co-investing with your community foundation, the likelihood, your interest, have you been approached by your community foundation to work in a collaborative way to address issues beyond issues in your community? And if so, what sold you on that? And is that something too, as we look at the evolution of donors of color and realizing that it's not just religion and basic needs, is that also a call to action or a value proposition that you think might be appealing to donors of color to go beyond just their community in terms of problem solving?
I would say yes, because the Greater Cincinnati Foundation is doing a matching gift to the Giving Black Circle Fund, and so they are instrumental partners with us on choices that we've made. So I would say yes, the opportunity is very, very relevant, and I found them to be more than receptive. Actually, they have been more proactive than I would have thought they would have been.
This is Gloria. Could I add that one of the things that we don't really talk about is, do we trust our foundation? And does our communities of color know that they exist? Mm-hmm. So that takes an outreach effort by the community foundation. If their board of directors are not diverse, then they have to go out there and say, here we are, this is who we are, this is the service we can do for the community. We want to be your partner, and then develop that trust. It's not going to happen overnight in some cases. It depends on the community, of course, but that effort has to be made. That effort has to be made. And so for me, trust is a big issue because all of us who give in some way or another have had an occasion when we have given to something and it hasn't been used the way we thought it would be used or the way it was sold to us. And so we have to trust that community foundation to honor what our contractual agreement is. And so if we don't know about you and we don't know who sits on your board, or you haven't made an outreach to be a partner, that is important. And so I think outreach and letting the community know who you are and what you do is very important. Some community foundations, I think, do it better than others, but I think that has to be an emphasis. And it's not, and again, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a steady thing of building up that reputation.
Yeah, that's so true. Gloria, are there any strategies that you've seen your community foundation employ that you think might be effective to share with our audience today in terms of engaging donors of color?
Well, they have to be visible. They have to be visible. And I think in the sense of attending functions or being at a resource fair or that thing. I know several years ago we had, we've had a lot of fires, as you well know. So they created a fund, and the board of directors was not quite sure how to handle it, but we became the depository for the funds collected to help the victims of those fires. And that helped an awful lot, I think, in getting people to say, oh, it's not just handling other people's money, they are also interested in our community. And partnering, I think that is very, very important that they be visible. There are other people, we constantly get bombarded because once you get on a list that you give, right, you get bombarded by everybody. And so you have to go with those people that you have a relationship with and established a trust relationship with.
Yeah. You're so right about that, Gloria, because we know, in order, when you talk about outreach efforts and being in the community, how important is it for the person making the outreach to look like the people that we're trying to bring in?
That's right.
So, I think that trust factor at a high level, and also being very committed to diversity and inclusion does build trust that this is a place where we all can belong and have our voices be heard. And hopefully, I hope that the community foundations are being seen as more than just a distribution channel for grants, but really a part of solving community issues.
That's right.
And issues that matter to communities across the country, and not just specific ones, but where everyone can see their faces and their voices being represented.
I agree. One of the projects that our local, because the community foundation that I'm involved with covers 2 huge counties that are the size of small states, San Bernardino and Riverside. They're huge. And so the diversity just in geography, we're desert, we're mountains, we're all kinds of things, and the diversity of the graphics also. So one of the things that has been very successful is the youth Grantmakers. And I say that it's from my educational point of view, it's how best do you find people to understand giving than to give them the opportunity to do a community assessment, put out an RFP, then gather together collaborative to decide who's going to get a grant. And we take high school students to do that. They in turn will go out hopefully into our community and know what philanthropy is and what charitable giving is. We got it from several years ago, and it And I know as a foundation board, we were saying, wait a minute, we're used to handling only money. Now we're going into programming.
Right.
And that was kind of controversial at the time. But we went ahead and did it, and it's one of our most successful programs. And it's teaching. I mean, I wish I had had that as a youngster.
As a young person.
Yeah, I had to learn it the hard way by being on boards.
Right, right. Before we turn to questions and answers, I'd like to pose one last question to our panel. What advice would you give to community foundations who are seeking to engage diverse donors? Paul?
Well, you know, I think there's an issue of people who are famous and wealthy and all of that, and so you know, in my imaginations, you know, I would love to attend a reception or a conference with maybe Javi Baez from the Cubs here, or Jennifer Lopez, or Lin-Manuel Miranda. In fact, I went to one with Lin-Manuel because he was heavily involved in raising money for Puerto Rico when they had the storms there. I read a report on fundraising in Puerto Rico during that time, and the first $458 million that went into the island was not from the government, our government, not from the Puerto Rico government. It was from the Puerto Rican diaspora, and it was all private dough, a little staggering. But the fact is that I think, you know, for those of us, you know, those who were perhaps, you know, famous and very identifiable and extremely creative, to get them in a room with folks who are not, but who have an inclination to, you know, to put up some money for good causes. It's a way of spreading the concept, I think, you know, across perhaps a city or even a state.
Thank you.
You know, picking up a little bit on what Gloria said before, I think the best way and the best you know, diplomats, if you will, for the kind of giving that we do, especially in education, are, you know, the people themselves. You know, we keep having fundraisers through our nonprofit here every couple of years to replenish our scholarship fund. And I keep telling folks, look, you know, better than gold, better than the stock market, better than real estate is investing in people and human potential, because you know what? When folks are in a career for 35, 40 years, you know, that rate of return is enormous and way beyond anything you can get, you know, in the private markets.
Terrific. Alok, what advice would you give?
Well, I think the Asian and especially the South Asian community is probably a bit of an outlier. And I say this to my colleagues all the time. South Asians in general, as an immigrant group, we're not fleeing oppression, we're not fleeing tyranny, we're coming here for opportunity. And I think because of that, there are strong ties back home, as people would say. We send a lot of money back in remittances. We send a lot of money back for causes in India and other places in South Asia. I think to get people of Asian background more involved, perhaps you need to find causes that make them look outside their own community. It is a very insular community at times. And I think part of the reason my family hasn't been insular is because even in India, we were a minority group, a minority religious group. And that kind of made us look outwards just de facto, because we were always looking at the world from that viewpoint. So raising awareness in the Asian community, and because they're so focused on career and things, showing how donor advised funds and charitable giving like that can be advantageous for them as well, in terms of achieving their giving goals, but also doing it in a smart, efficient manner that kind of appeals to their career-oriented focus at times. That's about all I can, it's a very difficult question for me in terms of the Asian community, how to get them more involved. But those are my initial thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Gloria?
I think one of the things we haven't talked about, especially in the Southwest, is that we have several generations. We have those who have recently arrived, and we have those who have been here for a long, long time. I am third generation of, but I am first generation college going. So the circumstances of my family's getting here where they came to work in the railroad. And so that was late 1800s and early 1900s. So, but I find now, as somebody who is involved and has a finger on the pulse of my community, that there is an awful lot of misconception that we're a monolith, that we're not all the same. And so the strategies, which makes it a little bit more difficult for the outreach people too. There is the recently arrived, the immigrant, which is a huge issue in our community. The dreamers, the people at the border. I mean, just an awful lot of ugliness that's going on. And then you have people who are the baby boomers and the people who are the millennials, and all have a slightly different aspect about who they are and how they help their community. So it gets more complex. It gets more complex. And to some degree, there is that also in some of the other communities. I think the one in trying to make sure that each generation understands the history and then how they fit into a community. And it's a big issue. It's a big issue.
Beverly? Final
Yeah,
thought?
I'll just go back to a point that Gloria made, and I believe Paul made as well, is that understanding the audience, right? And so if the community foundation is more diverse, if they have diverse board representation or committee representation, that gives you an opportunity to better understand the community that you're trying to serve. So that would be the first place that I would look.
Yep. Terrific. Well, I think we have one or two questions that we have time for before we wrap up this afternoon. Jamie?
And participants, if you do have questions, just a reminder to log into the Q&A function and shoot your question over to us. But so we do have one question, and I believe this was intended for all of the panelists, each of the panelists to answer. What have you found to be the most challenging aspect for you in the world of philanthropy?
It's Beverly. I would say the most challenging thing for me is decisiveness on who I give to. About 5 years ago, I pared down my primary giving list from 10 organizations down to 3. And so that I could then do episodic giving to things that happen naturally in the community. I think it's very hard to stick to that because there's no opportunity that's not a good opportunity to fund. Because if I don't do it, then I feel a level of guilt. So I think the hardest thing for me is to be laser focused on my top 3 charities and then figure out what to do with the remaining funds that I want to distribute.
Okay. And I hear in that a desire to have more money so that you could make more grants into the community, impacting more people.
Yes. For me, it's not about cutting back. I want to be able to give more and have more of an impact. And it's just having that discipline to know who, when, and where. And so I've tried to isolate it to 3 causes, if you will. So then that would give me more flexibility.
Yeah. I agree. This is Gloria, and I agree. We sat down and said, this is who we have given to in the past, and do we want to continue doing that given what is important to us? But I think it's very important that you sit down and you say, this is what I believe in, this is my passion, and how am I going to make the biggest influence as far as contribution is concerned. And then, and yes, there is a feeling of guilt when somebody approaches you, and I think to myself, it's not on the list, it's not on the list. And so I wind up making a very small contribution, but that's a mistake. I really should have stuck to my parameters that I gave myself. And it is a very difficult thing, especially when you have, and you should put it out as a budget. This is what, for us, this is what we earn. This is the percentage that we think we should be able to give. What does that mean to our family budget overall? And so we have taken that approach to it. And maybe it's because we run a business that we think that way. I don't know.
Okay. Hello?
I think our biggest issues are sometimes, parsing between programs that we think can be sustainable and affect actual change. A lot of what we do is, especially with refugees and asylum seekers, can often be seen as kind of emergency needs kind of work. And we're always looking for opportunities to, for example, in that particular area, how do we transition them to a stable life here in the United States? How do we protect them? That sort of thing. And it's just hard in terms of, finding or even, urging our partners to help create that kind of program. And it's balancing between the emergency needs and then the long-term programs that I find difficult at the very least.
And Paul?
For me, it's perhaps unique or almost unique in that, we have limitations. We have a scholarship fund. It's in a small university. We can fund maybe 4 folks at the same time going through graduate school. It's a 2-year program. So we invest perhaps $15,000 a student in their sort of for their graduate work. That's about 60% of what they need. But we, have more people that need, that are interested in the program. So winnowing it down to those that are, the most needy and the most deserving is a real challenge. I use a lot of holy water here, so that's a problem.
Great.
I would like to thank Beverly, Gloria, Alok, Hippolito. Thank you all so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for the impact that you're making in the lives of families and children and young people in your communities and across the country. As we wrap up our time today, we just wanted to reflect on a couple of things. And that this information is taken from a recent report when we kind of looked at the philanthropic profile of donors, some characteristics, and then we tried to match it up with, so what would be a value proposition in terms of a donor advised fund appeal? As you can see, as you look at the arrows on slide 10, that again, you see the appeal, you see the philanthropic characteristics, and I really hope that our colleagues on the phone would take a look at the appeal and continue to add to what we know about communities of color and try to make a match, and you're going to make probably several matches when you look at the appeal and the value proposition. Lastly, as a part of our closing thoughts today, as community foundation leaders, you have such a game-changing opportunity to model how to engage diverse donors as philanthropists and to showcase the fact that anyone can be a philanthropist. Donor-advised funds have the potential to democratize philanthropy by enabling individuals of all income levels to give more strategically and to express their potential through efforts to do good with measurable impact. Donor-advised funds have the potential to create a much more vibrant community, a much more giving world, and create fundamental shifts in our ecosystem of giving and to create a more inclusive donor population. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And with that, do we have any wrap up, Jamie, that we want to leave you with?
Well, again, I would echo Brenda's thanks to our panelists and to all of the participants and for everything that each of us are doing in our own communities. Leva, can you remind us about what happens following this?
Yes, thank you so much, Jamie. So before we wrap up, just a quick reminder to keep an eye out for an email from us, the Alford Group, with the recording of today's presentation, as well as the full slides. Another reminder that if you're seeking a CFRE credit, this is eligible for that. And also a request to please complete the short survey in our email to give us some feedback and tell us how we did today. If we did not have a chance to answer your question or you have any questions in the future, please feel free to contact us here at the Alford Group. Our contact information is up on the screen and we would love to hear from you. Again, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. Wish you a happy new year, and we will now disconnect.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.